The rain drummed against the windshield as Derek pulled into the driveway of their suburban Phoenix home at 5:47 a.m., still smelling like another woman's vanilla perfume. His hands trembled as he approached the front door, not from guilt, but from the eerie silence that greeted him. The porch light was off, the baby's cry that usually echoed through the walls at dawn was absent, and when he turned his key, nothing happened. The locks had been changed. Through the living room window, he could see empty spaces where Natalie's rocking chair used to sit, where baby Lily's bassinet once stood. His wife and 3-month-old daughter had vanished without a trace. Every year, thousands of women discover their partner's infidelity and make the brave decision to leave with their children, just like Natalie did. Has something like this ever happened to you? Have you ever felt so betrayed that disappearing seemed like the only way to protect yourself and your child? Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. Derek pressed his face against the cold glass, his breath fogging the window as he peered into what used to be his perfect life. The family photos were gone from the mantel. Natalie's medical school textbooks that she studied while breastfeeding Lily, gone. Even the tiny pink socks that were always scattered around the living room had disappeared. But what made his stomach drop wasn't what was missing. It was what Natalie had left behind, his laptop, opened on the kitchen counter, facing the window like she wanted him to see it. The screen displayed his email inbox, and even from outside, he could see the subject line of the draft email he thought he deleted, starting over, "Our new life together." In real life, cheating husbands often think they're cleverer than they are, leaving digital trails of their betrayal for their wives to discover. Did someone you trusted think you were too naive to figure out their lies? Have you ever found evidence that someone was planning to leave you while still pretending to love you? The neighbors' houses remained dark and quiet, but Derek could feel eyes watching him from behind curtains. Mrs. Rodriguez next door had always been friendly with Natalie, often bringing over homemade tamales when she knew Derek was working late. Now he wondered what Natalie had told her. What had the whole neighborhood witnessed? Derek pulled out his phone with shaking fingers and dialed Natalie's number. It rang once, twice, then went straight to a recording. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." She had changed her phone number. She had planned this. This wasn't an emotional reaction. This was a calculated escape. Many women who leave abusive or unfaithful partners must completely disappear, changing phone numbers, addresses, and even their daily routines to protect themselves and their children. Have you ever felt so unsafe in a relationship that you considered completely erasing your old life to start over? Do you know the warning signs that it might be time to plan your own escape? Derek's second call was to Amber, the woman whose bed he'd just left an hour ago. "Something's wrong," he whispered into the phone, his voice cracking. "They're gone. Natalie and the baby. They're not here." Amber's response was cold, calculated. "Well, you said you wanted to be with me anyway. Now you're free." But Derek wasn't feeling free. He was feeling the weight of consequences he'd never considered. For 6 months, while Natalie's body grew their child, while she threw up every morning and couldn't sleep at night, while she attended doctor's appointments alone because he was too busy with work, he'd been building a fantasy life with another woman. Amber was young, childless, uncomplicated. She didn't have stretch marks or baby weight or postpartum depression. She didn't wake up crying at 3 a.m. because their baby wouldn't stop teething. She was easy. Natalie was real life. Real women deal with the aftermath of pregnancy and childbirth while their partners sometimes seek comfort in affairs, abandoning them when they need support most. How would you feel if someone left you during the most vulnerable time of your life? Have you ever been abandoned when you needed someone the most? As dawn broke over Phoenix, Derek finally found the spare key under the decorative cactus pot, exactly where it had always been. But when he opened the door, the house felt like a museum of his former life. The silence was deafening. No baby bottles drying by the sink. No breast pump parts scattered on the counter. No sound of Natalie humming lullabies while she folded impossibly tiny clothes. Instead, there was something worse, evidence. Spread across the dining room table like a prosecutor's case file were printed screenshots of his text messages, credit card statements highlighting expensive dinners and hotel charges, and receipts from jewelry purchases Natalie had never received. In the center of it all was a handwritten note in Natalie's careful curse work. "I know everything. Lily deserves better than a father who builds lies instead of a life. Don't look for us." Women who discover infidelity often become forensic accountants, piecing together months or years of deception through bank statements, phone records, and paper trails their partners thought were hidden. Have you ever had to become a detective in your own relationship? Did you discover that your shared money was funding someone else's happiness while you struggled to pay bills? The house phone rang, shattering the silence. Derek lunged for it, hoping it was Natalie. Instead, it was his mother-in-law, Elena's voice sharp as broken glass. "Derek, if you're looking for my daughter and granddaughter, don't. She's safe. She's protected. And she's never coming back to someone who could betray her while she was carrying his child." The line went dead. Derek sank into the kitchen chair, surrounded by the evidence of his double life, finally understanding that Natalie hadn't just left him. She had outsmarted him. She had planned, prepared, and executed an escape while he was too busy living his fantasy to notice that his reality was crumbling. Have you ever underestimated someone's strength, only to discover they were more capable than you imagined? Do you have a support system that would help you escape if you needed to disappear? 3 hours earlier, while Derek was still asleep in Amber's downtown apartment, Natalie sat in her nursing chair with 3-month-old Lily pressed against her chest, staring at the phone bill that had arrived in yesterday's mail. Her hands shook as she traced the highlighted numbers, dozens of calls to the same unknown contact, always lasting exactly the duration of Derek's lunch breaks from the construction site. The calls started 6 months ago, right when her morning sickness was at its worst and she could barely keep food down. While she was growing their child, he was growing a relationship with someone else. In reality, phone bills are often the first place women discover evidence of affairs, those mysterious numbers that appear when their partners think they're too tired or distracted to notice. Have you ever felt like something was wrong in your relationship but couldn't quite put your finger on it? Did you ever find evidence hiding in plain sight that you'd been ignoring? Lily stirred in her arms, making those soft baby sounds that used to make Derek smile before he started coming home later and later each night. Natalie gently placed her daughter in the bouncy seat and powered on Derek's laptop, the same laptop he'd carelessly left open while rushing out for his early morning work meeting. His email was still logged in, and what she found there made her blood freeze. Draft emails to amberfitness22@gmail.com discussing weekend getaway plans, explicit messages about hotel rooms, and worst of all, an email titled, "When I Leave Her," with detailed plans about starting over after dealing with the baby situation. The baby situation. That's what her daughter had become to him. Real women discover these digital betrayals every day, finding emails, texts, and social media messages that reveal their partners view their children as obstacles rather than blessings. How would you feel if you discovered that someone you loved referred to your child as a situation to be dealt with? Have you ever been reduced to an inconvenience in someone else's life plans? Natalie's chest tightened as she scrolled through months of deception. Photos of expensive dinners at restaurants she'd never heard of. Dinners that happened on nights Derek claimed he was working overtime to pay for Lily's medical bills. Screenshots of hotel confirmations for romantic weekend getaways that occurred while Natalie was alone, bleeding from her C-section, learning how to breastfeed with cracked and painful nipples. Each receipt felt like a slap across her face. While she was surviving on crackers and peanut butter because they needed to save money for the baby, Derek was spending hundreds of dollars on wine dinners and couple spa packages. Women in similar situations often discover that their sacrificial budgeting was funding their partner's affairs, that the money they saved by buying generic diapers was being spent on lingerie for another woman. Have you ever sacrificed your own needs to save money, only to discover that someone was secretly spending that money on luxuries you never got to enjoy? Did someone make you feel guilty for spending money while they were secretly being generous with someone else? The worst discovery came when Natalie found Derek's credit card statements hidden in his toolbox in the garage. Charges from Victoria's Secret on the day she came home from the hospital. A jewelry purchase from Tiffany and Company the week Lily was born, jewelry that never appeared under their Christmas tree or for their anniversary. Spa treatments and massage packages for two, scheduled during his mandatory overtime shifts. But what broke her completely was a charge for a baby swing and stroller set, purchased for an address she didn't recognize. Derek wasn't just cheating, he was building a complete alternative life where another woman got to play house with him, maybe even with children. In real life, unfaithful partners often purchase duplicate items for their secret relationships, creating shadow households where they play the role of devoted partner while neglecting their actual family. Have you ever wondered where money was disappearing to, only to realize it was funding someone else's happiness? Did you ever discover that someone was giving another person the life they promised to build with you? Natalie's hands trembled as she printed everything. Every email, every receipt, every text message preview she could access. The evidence filled an entire manila folder, a paper trail of betrayal that read like a timeline of her own humiliation. While she was learning how to change diapers and pumping breast milk at 3 a.m., Derek was learning how to sneak around and lie to her face. While she was gaining weight and losing sleep and wondering if she'd ever feel like herself again, he was falling in love with someone else. While she was Googling how to know if your baby is getting enough milk and crying from exhaustion, he was Googling romantic restaurants and planning secret vacations. Countless women have sat alone at night, piecing together evidence of their partner's double life while caring for children who depend on them completely. Have you ever felt like you were living in a completely different reality than someone you trusted? Did you ever realize that while you were building a life together, someone else was planning their escape? The baby monitor crackled, and Natalie heard Lily starting to fuss in the nursery. As she climbed the stairs to comfort her daughter, she passed the family photos lining the wall. Photos of their wedding, her baby shower, Derek holding newborn Lily in the hospital with what she thought was pride in his eyes. Now she realized it might have been guilt. How many of those smiles were fake? How many times had he kissed her goodbye and driven straight to another woman's arms? How many nights had he come home smelling like someone else's perfume and blamed it on a new fabric softener at work? Women who discover long-term affairs often realize they've been living with a stranger, that the person they thought they knew was just a character their partner performed for their benefit. Have you ever looked back at happy memories and wondered if they were real? Did you ever realize that someone was acting like they loved you while secretly planning to leave? Natalie lifted Lily from her crib and held her close, breathing in that sweet baby scent that made everything else fade away. Her daughter's tiny fingers wrapped around her thumb, trusting and innocent, completely unaware that her father was planning to abandon them. In that moment, surrounded by the nursery they'd painted together, the crib Derek had assembled while talking about teaching Lily to ride bikes and helping her with homework, Natalie made a decision. She wouldn't be the woman who stayed and pretended not to know. She wouldn't be the woman who made excuses or tried to compete with someone else for her own husband's attention. She would be the woman who protected her daughter from growing up in a house built on lies. How would you feel if you realized that your child's father was planning to abandon her for another woman? Would you have the strength to walk away from everything familiar to protect your child's future? Toxic Truths helps women succeed in life by teaching you how to fight and survive these situations. Natalie returned to the living room with renewed purpose, Lily sleeping peacefully in her arms. She had evidence. She had proof. And most importantly, she had a choice. She could confront Derek and listen to his excuses and promises, or she could take control of her own story. As the sun began to rise over Phoenix, painting the sky in soft pastels that reminded her of the nursery walls, Natalie knew exactly what she was going to do. Have you ever reached a moment where you knew you had to choose between staying in a comfortable lie or facing a difficult truth? Do you have the courage to protect yourself and your children, even when it means starting over from nothing? By 6:30 a.m., Natalie had transformed from a heartbroken wife into a woman with a mission. She stood in the bathroom mirror, Lily balanced on her hip, and made 3 phone calls that would change everything. The first was to her sister Carmen in Tucson. "I need you to come get us," she whispered into the phone, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Bring your SUV. I have evidence, and I have a plan." Carmen didn't ask questions. She just said she'd be there in 2 hours. The second call was to her best friend Jasmine, a paralegal who worked nights and would be awake. "I need to know how to protect myself legally," Natalie said, still rocking Lily gently. Within minutes, Jasmine was texting her links to family law attorneys and domestic relations courts. Real women in crisis don't just react, they strategize, calling on their support networks to help them navigate the legal and practical challenges of leaving an unfaithful partner. Do you have people in your life who would drop everything to help you in a crisis? Have you ever had to choose between confronting someone directly or protecting yourself by planning an exit strategy first? The third call was the hardest. Natalie dialed her mother-in-law Elena, the woman who had welcomed her into the family 5 years ago and treated her like the daughter she'd never had. Elena's voice was warm and sleepy when she answered, clearly expecting a routine check-in about the baby. "Mija, is everything okay? It's so early." Natalie's voice cracked as she explained what she'd found, reading aloud from Derek's emails while Lily gurgled contentedly in her arms. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long that Natalie wondered if the call had dropped. Then Elena's voice returned, sharp and cold as winter wind. "That bastard. I raised him better than this. You pack everything you need, and don't you dare feel guilty for protecting my granddaughter." In real life, mothers-in-law often become unexpected allies when they discover their sons' betrayals, choosing loyalty to the woman who's carrying on their family legacy over the man who's destroying it. Have you ever been surprised by who stood with you during a crisis? Did someone you didn't expect become your strongest supporter when you needed it most? While Carmen drove through the desert toward Phoenix, Natalie moved through her house like she was defusing a bomb, careful, methodical, knowing she had limited time before Derek returned from whatever lie he was living. She started with the nursery, packing everything Lily would need: clothes, diapers, bottles, the breast pump that had become her constant companion, the white noise machine that helped Lily sleep. Each item she folded felt like evidence of the life she'd built while Derek was building another one elsewhere. She packed the baby book where she'd been documenting Lily's milestones: first smile, first time sleeping through the night, first laugh. Moments Derek had missed because he was too busy creating new memories with Amber. Women leaving unfaithful partners often face the heartbreaking task of packing up their children's belongings, knowing they're not just moving houses but rebuilding their entire concept of family. Have you ever had to pack up a life you thought was permanent? Did you ever realize that while you were building a future, someone else was planning to destroy it? Natalie moved to their bedroom next, her hands shaking as she opened the jewelry box Derek had given her for their 3rd wedding anniversary. Inside was her grandmother's engagement ring, the one she'd worn before Derek proposed with his own choice, a ring she now realized he'd probably learned to pick out by shopping for jewelry with Amber. She slipped her grandmother's ring onto her finger, feeling the weight of generations of strong women who had survived worse than this. She packed her important documents: birth certificates, social security cards, her nursing school transcripts, and the life insurance policy that listed Lily as beneficiary. In the back of their shared closet, behind Derek's work boots, she found a shoebox filled with old love letters he'd written her during their courtship, letters that now felt like evidence of a person who no longer existed, if he ever had. Real women in these situations often struggle with reconciling the person they fell in love with against the person they've discovered their partner actually is, wondering if the good times were ever genuine. Have you ever looked at old photos or mementos and wondered if those happy memories were real? Did you ever feel like you'd been in love with someone who was just pretending to be the person you needed? The kitchen was harder to navigate because every corner held evidence of the domestic life she'd thought they were building together. The high chair where Lily was just starting to try solid foods. The breast milk storage bags organized by date in the freezer. The meal prep containers where Natalie had been making Derek's lunches every morning, trying to save money and show love through small gestures while he was spending that saved money on restaurant dates with another woman. She packed formula as backup, knowing that stress might affect her milk supply, and grabbed the coffee maker, a small luxury she wasn't willing to sacrifice in her new life. Women who leave often have to make heartbreaking decisions about what they can take and what they must leave behind, prioritizing their children's needs over sentimental items that represent the life they're losing. Have you ever had to choose between taking meaningful objects and traveling light enough to escape quickly? Did you ever realize that the domestic rituals you thought showed love were actually just you serving someone who was being served by someone else too? By 8 a.m., Carmen's silver SUV pulled into the driveway. Natalie watched through the window as her sister, 5 years older, recently divorced herself, wearing sunglasses and a determined expression, stepped out and surveyed the house like she was planning a military operation. Carmen had been through her own version of this story 2 years earlier when she discovered her ex-husband's gambling addiction and secret debts. She knew the importance of moving quickly and efficiently, of not getting lost in emotion when action was required. "Where's the diaper bag?" Carmen asked, all business as she entered the house. "And please tell me you're not planning to leave him a note explaining yourself." Natalie shook her head. "I'm leaving him something better than a note." She gestured toward the dining room table where she'd arranged all the printed evidence like a museum exhibit of betrayal. Women who've survived their own betrayals often become the best allies for other women going through similar situations. They understand the practical steps and emotional strength required to rebuild a life from scratch. Do you have someone in your life who survived their own version of this story? Have you ever been grateful for hard-won wisdom from someone who understood exactly what you were going through? As they loaded the last of Lily's things into Carmen's SUV, Natalie felt something she hadn't expected: relief. Not happiness. The betrayal still felt like a physical weight on her chest, but the relief that comes from finally taking action instead of absorbing pain. She strapped Lily into the car seat they'd transferred from Derek's truck, the same truck he'd been using to drive to hotels and romantic dinners, while telling Natalie they couldn't afford a vacation or a date night. Lily looked up at her with those bright, trusting eyes that reminded Natalie why none of this was about revenge. It was about protection. As Carmen backed out of the driveway, Natalie didn't look back at the house where she'd planned to raise her daughter, the house where she'd hung Christmas stockings for a family that had never actually existed the way she'd imagined it. Have you ever felt relief when you finally stopped fighting for something that was already broken? Did you ever realize that the hardest part wasn't leaving, but admitting that you needed to leave? Toxic Truths helps women succeed in life by teaching you how to fight and survive these situations. The drive to Tucson stretched ahead like a bridge between her old life and whatever came next. Natalie had no idea where she and Lily would live long-term, how she'd finish nursing school as a single mother, or whether Derek would fight for custody or quietly let them disappear. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty: Lily would grow up seeing her mother choose truth over comfort, strength over security, and self-respect over a relationship that existed only in her imagination. Have you ever made a decision that terrified you but felt absolutely right? Do you believe that children learn more from watching their parents' actions than from hearing their parents' words? Carmen's guest bedroom in Tucson became Natalie's war room. While Lily napped in the portable crib they'd set up by the window, Natalie spread Derek's printed emails and credit card statements across Carmen's dining table like a prosecutor preparing for trial. But she wasn't just organizing evidence, she was learning how to think like someone who refused to be a victim. Her first call was to Jessica Martinez, the family law attorney Jasmine had recommended. Jessica's voice was calm but direct. "Before we talk about divorce, we need to talk about protecting your assets. If he's been using marital funds for an affair, we can freeze the accounts." Natalie's hands shook as she realized she'd been thinking too small. This wasn't just about catching Derek in a lie, it was about securing Lily's future. Real women in these situations often discover that emotional betrayal comes with financial betrayal, and protecting their children means learning to think strategically about money, custody, and legal rights they never imagined needing to understand. Have you ever had to become an expert in something you never wanted to learn about? Did you ever realize that protecting yourself meant fighting battles you never saw coming? Jessica walked Natalie through the process of documenting everything with forensic precision. "Print bank statements going back 2 years, she instructed. "Screenshot every social media interaction you can access. Save every text message, even the boring ones, because patterns matter in court." Natalie had never thought of herself as someone who could navigate legal strategy, but desperation had turned her into a fast learner. She discovered that Derek had been transferring money to a separate savings account she'd never known about. Small amounts, $200 here, $500 there, but over 6 months it added up to nearly $8,000. Money that should have been going toward Lily's college fund or their mortgage was funding Derek's secret life with Amber. Women who investigate their partner's finances often uncover systematic deception that goes far beyond the affair itself, discovering that their household budget was being manipulated to support an entirely separate relationship. Have you ever trusted someone completely with shared finances, only to discover they were stealing from your future? Did you ever realize that someone was making you worry about money while secretly spending it on luxuries for someone else? The next call was harder but necessary. Natalie contacted Derek's employer, Phoenix Construction, and spoke with his supervisor, Mike Rodriguez. "I need to know if Derek has been working the overtime hours he's claimed," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Mike's uncomfortable silence told her everything before he spoke. "Ma'am, Derek hasn't worked overtime in 3 months. Company policy actually prohibits it right now due to budget cuts." So the nights Derek claimed he was earning extra money for Lily's expenses, he was actually somewhere else entirely. Natalie felt her chest tighten as she realized how methodical his deception had been. He'd used his employer's legitimate financial struggles to explain why he couldn't spend money on his family while secretly spending more than ever on Amber. In real life, unfaithful partners often exploit their partner's trust and concern about family finances, claiming work obligations or financial constraints while actually having more freedom and money than they admit. Have you ever made sacrifices based on someone else's claims about money problems, only to discover they were lying about their financial situation? Did someone ever make you feel guilty for spending money while they were secretly being generous with someone else? Carmen helped with the digital investigation, using her own experience from divorcing a financially deceptive ex-husband. "Check his social media followers," she suggested, pulling up Derek's Instagram on her laptop. "Look for women who like every post, especially ones who started following him around the time the affair began." They found Amber's profile easily, AmberFit_Phoenix, with photos of her at expensive restaurants Natalie recognized from Derek's credit card statements. But worse than the romantic dinner photos were the casual ones. Amber wearing Derek's construction company t-shirt, Amber at the Phoenix Zoo with a caption about perfect Sunday dates, Amber at a Diamondbacks game in seats that would have cost more than Natalie's monthly grocery budget. Each photo was time-stamped, creating a parallel timeline of Derek's life that existed alongside his life with Natalie and Lily. Women investigating affairs often discover that their partners weren't just cheating. They were building complete alternative relationships with shared experiences, inside jokes, and future plans that mirror the relationship they're betraying. Have you ever realized that someone was creating the same memories with another person that you thought were special and unique to your relationship? Did you ever discover that your partner was living a completely different life that you knew nothing about? The most painful discovery came when Carmen helped Natalie access Derek's Amazon account. The purchase history revealed a pattern of duplicate gifts. He'd bought the same jewelry for both women, the same perfume, even the same books. But what broke Natalie's heart was finding an order for a baby carrier, the expensive ergonomic kind she'd put on their registry but they decided was too costly. Derek had bought it 3 weeks ago and shipped it to an address she didn't recognize. He was preparing for a life where Amber might help raise his daughter, where another woman would get to experience the bonding and convenience that Natalie had been denied for financial reasons. The realization that Derek was not only planning to leave his family but preparing for Amber to replace Natalie in Lily's life sparked something fierce and protective in her chest. In reality, unfaithful partners sometimes try to seamlessly transition their children into relationships with affair partners, viewing their children as transferable assets rather than human beings with attachment needs and emotional stability requirements. How would you feel if you discovered that someone was planning for another person to take your place in your child's life? Have you ever realized that someone saw you as replaceable, including in your role as a parent? Natalie spent the afternoon creating a comprehensive timeline, cross-referencing Derek's location claims with his actual credit card usage, social media activity, and work schedule. The pattern was devastatingly clear. Every overtime shift corresponded with charges at restaurants, hotels, or entertainment venues near Amber's apartment. Every guy's night out aligned with romantic expenses for two. Every work emergency that kept him away from home matched up with social media posts showing him and Amber at couples' activities. What emerged was a 6-month period during which Derek had been systematically lying about his whereabouts while Natalie was going through pregnancy complications, labor, and the challenging early months of motherhood. Women who document their partner's deception often discover that the lies weren't impulsive mistakes but carefully orchestrated campaigns of manipulation designed to maintain two relationships simultaneously. Have you ever realized that someone's excuses and explanations were actually part of a calculated plan to deceive you? Did you ever discover that what you thought were occasional lapses in judgment were actually consistent patterns of intentional betrayal? Toxic Truths helps women succeed in life by teaching you how to fight and survive these situations, and Natalie was learning that survival required more than just gathering evidence, it required building a strategy for her future. Jessica had recommended a financial advisor who specialized in helping women rebuild after divorce, and Natalie scheduled a consultation for the next morning. She also researched childcare options in Tucson, investigating whether she could finish her nursing program at the University of Arizona instead of Phoenix. Every decision felt overwhelming, but Carmen reminded her of something crucial. You don't have to solve everything today. You just have to take the next right step. That evening, as Lily fell asleep on Natalie's chest in Carmen's guest room, Natalie felt something she hadn't experienced in months: clarity. She wasn't just running away from Derek's betrayal, she was running toward a life where her daughter would see her mother refuse to accept lies as love. Have you ever found strength you didn't know you had when you were fighting to protect someone you loved? Did you ever discover that the scariest situations sometimes reveal the most courage you've ever possessed? As midnight approached in Tucson, while Derek was probably just discovering their empty house in Phoenix, Natalie was already 12 hours ahead in building a new life. She had documentation, legal representation, financial strategy, and most importantly, she had clarity about what kind of mother she wanted to be for Lily. She wasn't the heartbroken wife anymore, she was a woman with a plan. And tomorrow, that plan would begin in earnest. Have you ever experienced the moment when victimhood transformed into empowerment? Do you believe that sometimes the worst betrayals force us to become stronger versions of ourselves than we ever imagined possible? 3 days into her stay in Tucson, Natalie knew she couldn't avoid the inevitable confrontation forever. Derek had been calling Carmen's house relentlessly, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails that oscillated between apologies and threats. "I know you're there, Natalie," his voice crackled through Carmen's answering machine. "We need to talk about this like adults. You can't just take my daughter and disappear." But Natalie wasn't ready to talk. She was ready to act. Armed with 3 days of evidence gathering and legal consultation, she made a decision that surprised even Carmen. She was going back to Phoenix, not to reconcile, but to face Derek on her own terms. Jessica Martinez had advised her that direct confrontation, when properly prepared and documented, could be more powerful than hiding. "Let him see that you're not the same woman who was changing diapers while he was changing hotel rooms," Jessica had said. Real women facing betrayal often reach a point where avoiding the confrontation becomes more exhausting than facing it, where they realize that their power lies not in hiding from the truth but in forcing others to confront it. Have you ever reached a moment where you knew that running away was actually the weaker choice than standing your ground? Did you ever realize that someone was counting on your silence to continue their lies? Carmen drove Natalie and Lily back to Phoenix on Thursday afternoon, timing their arrival for when Derek would be at his construction site, assuming he was actually there this time. Natalie had called Derek's supervisor Mike again, confirming that Derek was scheduled for a legitimate workday, which meant she'd have time to stage her confrontation exactly as she planned it. She wasn't sneaking back into her own house, she was reclaiming it. The locks had been changed, but Natalie still had the garage door opener, and Derek hadn't thought to reprogram it. As the garage door rolled up and they drove into the familiar space where Derek's truck usually sat, Natalie felt her heart racing, not with fear, but with anticipation. This was her house too, and she had every right to be here. Women who've been betrayed often have to literally fight for access to their own homes, using whatever legal and practical means necessary to reclaim spaces where they should never have had to prove their right to exist. Have you ever felt like a stranger in your own home because of someone else's actions? Did you ever have to fight to access places that should have been safe havens for you? Inside the house, Natalie quickly confirmed what she'd suspected. Derek had cleaned up the evidence she'd left on the dining room table, but he'd been too panicked to think strategically. He'd shoved everything into a garbage bag in the garage, apparently planning to dispose of it later. Carmen helped her retrieve every document while Lily slept peacefully in her car seat, completely unaware that her mother was becoming someone entirely new in the space where she'd been born. But Natalie hadn't come just to collect evidence, she'd come to set a trap. She carefully rearranged the printed emails and credit card statements across the dining room table exactly as they'd been before, adding new evidence she'd discovered during their investigation in Tucson. Then she placed her phone in the kitchen, set to record, hidden behind the coffee maker Derek never used because he always stopped at Starbucks on his way to meet Amber. In real life, women confronting unfaithful partners often have to think like prosecutors, gathering evidence and creating documentation that will protect them legally while also psychologically preparing for the lies and manipulation they know are coming. Have you ever had to plan a conversation like it was a battle strategy? Did you ever realize that someone would lie to your face even when confronted with undeniable proof of their deception? At 5:47 p.m., exactly when Derek's work shift ended, Natalie heard his truck pull into the driveway. She positioned herself in the living room with Lily in her arms, surrounded by the evidence of his double life but appearing calm, almost serene. When Derek walked through the front door, using his key, which meant he'd had the locks changed back after discovering they were gone, his face went through a series of emotions so quickly it was almost comical: relief, confusion, anger, and finally calculation. "Thank God," he said, his voice dripping with manufactured concern. "I was so worried about you and the baby. Why didn't you answer my calls?" His performance was smooth, practiced, but Natalie had learned to see through it during their 3 days apart. She gestured silently toward the dining room table where his secrets lay spread out like a road map of betrayal. Derek's face paled as he realized she hadn't just left, she'd been investigating. Women who confront cheating partners often witness a fascinating psychological transformation. The moment their partner realizes that their victim has become their adversary, that tears and confusion have been replaced by evidence and strategy. Have you ever watched someone's face change when they realized you were no longer the person they thought they could manipulate? Did you ever see the exact moment when someone understood that their lies had been discovered and documented? "Natalie, I can explain all of this," Derek started, his voice taking on the patronizing tone she now recognized as manipulation disguised as patience. "You're not thinking clearly. Having a baby changes women emotionally. You're seeing things that aren't there." But instead of the usual self-doubt his gaslighting triggered, Natalie felt something new: amusement. She'd spent 3 days with a lawyer, a financial advisor, and investigative evidence. She knew exactly what she was seeing. "Which part should you explain first?" she asked, her voice steady as she rocked Lily gently. "The hotel bills from nights you told me you were working overtime, or the jewelry purchases that never appeared under our Christmas tree?" Derek's jaw tightened, but he maintained his concerned husband facade. "Those were business expenses. Client entertainment. You know how construction works. Relationships matter." Natalie reached for her phone and played a recording she'd made of her conversation with his supervisor Mike. "Derek hasn't worked overtime in 3 months. Company policy actually prohibits it right now due to budget cuts." The sound of Mike's voice filling their living room hit Derek like a physical blow. In reality, unfaithful partners often rely on their victims' isolation and emotional vulnerability, never expecting that their lies will be fact-checked or that their victims will build support networks capable of exposing the truth. Have you ever felt the power that comes from being prepared when someone expected you to be helpless? Did you ever turn someone's underestimation of you into your greatest advantage? Derek's mask began to slip as he realized that Natalie wasn't the overwhelmed new mother he'd left behind. "You went through my private things," he said, anger creeping into his voice. "You invaded my privacy. You can't use anything you found illegally." Natalie almost laughed at his attempt to make her feel guilty for discovering his lies. "Privacy?" she repeated, adjusting Lily against her shoulder. Like the privacy you gave me when you spent our money on hotels with your girlfriend? Like the privacy you gave our daughter when you planned to abandon her for someone else? She gestured toward the printed emails. Tell me, Derek, what part of dealing with the baby situation did I misunderstand? Derek's face flushed red as he realized she'd found his most damning communications. That's not what it sounds like. You're twisting everything. But Natalie had spent 3 days analyzing his words with Jessica Martinez, learning how courts interpret written evidence. Which part am I twisting? The part where you called your daughter a situation, or the part where you told Amber you were trapped in a marriage you never wanted? Women who confront their betrayers with documentation often discover that their partner's explanations become increasingly desperate and illogical when faced with their own written words, that people who lie smoothly in person become incoherent when forced to explain their documented deceptions. Have you ever watched someone try to explain away evidence that spoke for itself? Did you ever realize that the person you thought was clever was actually just good at lying to someone who trusted them? The confrontation reached its climax when Derek, desperate and cornered, played his final card. Fine, yes, I made mistakes. But I love you and Lily. We can go to counseling. I'll end things with Amber. We can start over. His voice cracked with what sounded like genuine emotion, and for a moment, Natalie felt the familiar tug of sympathy that had kept her trapped in previous arguments. But then she looked down at Lily, sleeping peacefully despite the tension in the room, and realized that her daughter's future was more important than Derek's feelings. You didn't make mistakes, Natalie said quietly. You made choices. For 6 months, while I was growing your child and preparing for our family, you chose to build a different family with someone else. That wasn't a mistake. That was a plan. She stood up, still holding Lily, and walked toward the front door. I'm not here to fight for you anymore, Derek. I'm here to tell you that I'm done. Toxic Truths helps women succeed in life by teaching you how to fight and survive these situations, and sometimes the most important lesson is knowing when the fight is over, when winning means walking away rather than staying to prove a point. Have you ever realized that the relationship you were fighting to save was actually the prison you needed to escape? Did you ever understand that someone's promises to change were just another manipulation to keep you trapped in their cycle of deception? As Natalie reached for the door handle, Derek grabbed her arm, not violently, but desperately, like a drowning man reaching for anything solid. You can't take my daughter away from me, he said, his voice breaking. I have rights. I'll fight you in court. Natalie looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face with an expression that was both pitying and steel-strong. Yes, you do have rights, she said calmly. And so does Lily. She has the right to grow up with a father who doesn't lie to her mother. She has the right to live in a home built on honesty instead of deception. And I have the right to raise her somewhere she won't learn that love comes with betrayal. She gently pulled her arm free, her movements so controlled and confident that Derek stepped back automatically. Your lawyers can call my lawyers. But I'm not negotiating with you anymore. Have you ever found strength in the moment when you stopped trying to save a relationship and started protecting yourself instead? Did you ever discover that your power came not from fighting harder, but from refusing to fight at all? It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. Alright, let's get back to it. 2 weeks after the confrontation in Phoenix, Natalie found herself sitting in a sterile conference room at the Pima County Family Court in Tucson, watching as her carefully documented evidence was transformed into official legal proceedings. Jessica Martinez sat beside her, a stack of financial records and printed communications organized with military precision. Across the table, Derek's attorney, a sharp-suited man named Robert Chen who specialized in defending unfaithful husbands, shuffled through his own papers with the confident air of someone who'd been through this routine dozens of times. But what Derek and his lawyer hadn't anticipated was the thorough investigation Natalie had conducted, or the additional evidence that had emerged once official legal processes began. The court had issued subpoenas for Derek's employment records, bank statements, and communication devices, revealing layers of deception that went far beyond a simple affair. Real women pursuing legal action against unfaithful partners often discover that the court system, when properly navigated, can uncover financial and emotional abuse patterns that would have remained hidden in private confrontations. Have you ever realized that involving legal authorities gave you access to truth that someone had been hiding from you? Did you ever discover that official investigations revealed deceptions you never could have uncovered on your own? The first bombshell came from Derek's employment records. Not only had he lied about working overtime, but Phoenix Construction's HR department revealed that Derek had been using company credit cards for personal expenses, specifically, charges at restaurants and hotels that aligned perfectly with his affair timeline. Mike Rodriguez, Derek's supervisor, provided a sworn statement that Derek had repeatedly requested schedule changes and time off that he'd attributed to family emergencies and doctor appointments for the baby. In reality, these schedule manipulations had allowed Derek to spend entire afternoons with Amber while telling Natalie he was earning overtime money for Lily's future. The company was launching its own investigation into Derek's misuse of corporate resources, which meant his employment was now in jeopardy alongside his marriage. Women seeking legal separation often discover that their partner's deceptions extend far beyond their personal relationship, that the same dishonesty destroying their marriage is often destroying their partner's professional life as well. Have you ever learned that someone's lies were more extensive than you imagined? Did you ever realize that someone who lied to you was also deceiving their employer, friends, or family in ways you never suspected? Jessica had also uncovered something that made Natalie's stomach turn. Amber wasn't Derek's first affair. Through social media investigations and witness interviews, they discovered evidence of at least 2 previous extramarital relationships during Natalie and Derek's marriage. Text message records showed that Derek had been pursuing other women as recently as 6 months before Natalie became pregnant with Lily. What Natalie had thought was a 6-month betrayal during her pregnancy was actually part of a 3-year pattern of serial infidelity. "This changes everything," Jessica explained to Natalie. Serial adultery demonstrates a pattern of behavior that courts take very seriously in custody and financial determinations. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness, this was a lifestyle choice. The realization that Derek had been systematically unfaithful for most of their marriage while Natalie was planning their future and trying to start a family hit her like physical pain. In reality, women who investigate their partner's infidelity often uncover evidence that their entire relationship was built on lies, that what they thought was a recent betrayal was actually ongoing deception that predated major life decisions like marriage, home purchases, and having children. Have you ever discovered that someone's betrayal was deeper and longer-lasting than you initially realized? Did you ever learn that major life decisions you made together were based on lies they'd been telling you for years? The financial investigation yielded even more devastating evidence. A forensic accountant hired by Jessica had traced Derek's spending patterns over 3 years, revealing that he'd systematically diverted money from their shared savings into a separate account that Natalie had never known existed. The account, opened 2 years earlier, contained over $15,000, money that Derek had stolen from their joint finances by claiming false expenses, hiding cash gifts from his family, and even selling tools and equipment that Natalie had assumed were still in their garage. The money had funded not just his affair with Amber, but previous relationships as well. He'd been living off of Natalie's trust and financial contributions while building a secret financial life that could support his extramarital activities. Women who undergo financial forensic investigations during divorce proceedings often discover that their partners were essentially stealing from the family budget to fund affairs, that their sacrificial budgeting and careful spending were being exploited to finance their partner's betrayals. Have you ever discovered that someone was stealing money you thought was going towards shared goals? Did you ever realize that your financial sacrifices were funding someone else's luxuries while you worried about making ends meet? Perhaps most damaging to Derek's case was the discovery of his communications with Amber about Lily. Text message recovery revealed that Derek had discussed bringing Lily to meet Amber multiple times, referring to these potential meetings as practice runs for when they could be a real family. He'd sent Amber photos of Lily without Natalie's knowledge or consent, and had even discussed the possibility of Amber attending one of Lily's pediatric appointments so she could get comfortable with the baby. The messages showed that Derek wasn't just planning to leave Natalie, He was planning to integrate Lily into his relationship with Amber as quickly as possible, with no regard for his daughter's emotional well-being or attachment needs. Family court judges take a particularly dim view of parents who treat children as transferable assets in extramarital relationships, and Derek's casual discussions about introducing Lily to his affair partner demonstrated a profound lack of understanding about child development and emotional stability. Real fathers who prioritize their affairs over their children's emotional needs often find themselves facing restricted custody arrangements, as courts recognize that such behavior indicates poor judgment about child welfare. How would you feel if you discovered that someone was planning to introduce your child to their affair partner without your knowledge? Have you ever realized that someone saw your child as a prop in their fantasy relationship rather than a human being with emotional needs? The court proceedings moved swiftly once the evidence was presented. Derek's attorney had clearly expected a standard adultery case, emotional testimony, he said she said accusations, and the usual plea for marriage counseling. Instead, they faced documented financial fraud, employment misconduct, serial infidelity, and endangerment of a minor child's emotional welfare. Judge Patricia Hernandez reviewed the evidence with the methodical attention of someone who'd seen too many cases where children suffered because courts didn't take parental misconduct seriously enough. "Mr. Rodriguez," she said, addressing Derek directly, "these financial records and communication logs paint a picture of systematic deception that spans several years. Your decision to involve your infant daughter in an extramarital relationship without her mother's knowledge raises serious questions about your judgment regarding child welfare." Derek, who had been confident that his charm and apologies would carry weight in court, looked increasingly pale as the judge continued. In reality, family court judges often see through the manipulative tactics that work in personal relationships, focusing instead on documented evidence and the best interests of children rather than emotional appeals from unfaithful parents. Have you ever watched someone realize that their manipulation tactics weren't working in a professional setting? Did you ever see someone face consequences in a forum where their charm and excuses carried no weight? The judge's preliminary ruling was swift and decisive. Given the evidence of financial misconduct, serial infidelity, and poor judgment regarding the minor child's welfare, I'm granting temporary sole custody to Mrs. Rodriguez, with supervised visitation rights for Mr. Rodriguez pending completion of court-ordered counseling and financial restitution. Derek's face went ashen as the reality of his situation sank in. He wouldn't be taking Lily home. He wouldn't be playing the devoted father role while continuing his secret life. His access to his daughter would be monitored and conditional on his willingness to address his pattern of deceptive behavior. Natalie felt a mixture of relief and sadness, not because she wanted to punish Derek, but because she'd needed the court system to validate what she'd known in her heart, that Lily deserved protection from the chaos Derek created wherever he went. Women who successfully navigate family court often find that the legal system's focus on children's welfare aligns with their maternal instincts, that what felt like protective intuition was actually sound judgment about their partner's character and decision-making abilities. Have you ever felt vindicated when an authority figure confirmed what you'd known instinctively? Did you ever realize that your protective instincts were actually accurate assessments of someone's character? Toxic Truths helps women succeed in life by teaching you how to fight and survive these situations, and Natalie had learned that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought in living rooms or bedrooms. They're fought in courtrooms where evidence matters more than emotion, where patterns of behavior carry more weight than promises to change. As they left the courthouse that afternoon, Jessica placed a supportive hand on Natalie's shoulder. "This is just the beginning," she said. "But you've already won the most important victory. You chose your daughter's future over your comfort zone." Natalie looked down at Lily, sleeping peacefully in her carrier, completely unaware that her mother had just secured her right to grow up in a home built on honesty rather than lies. Have you ever made a decision that felt terrifying in the moment but absolutely right in hindsight? Do you believe that children are worth fighting for, even when the fight is harder than staying silent? The legal victory was just the beginning, but it was a beginning that mattered. Derek would have to prove he was capable of being the father Lily deserved, rather than simply claiming the title because of biology. And Natalie had learned something crucial about herself. She was stronger than she'd ever imagined, and she was willing to use every legal tool available to protect the family she was building, a family of two that was infinitely more stable than the family of three that had existed only in her imagination. Have you ever discovered strength you didn't know you possessed when you were fighting for something bigger than yourself? Did you ever realize that sometimes protecting your family means restructuring it entirely? 4 months after the initial custody ruling, Natalie found herself preparing for the final custody hearing that would determine Lily's future permanently. The temporary arrangements had given Derek supervised visitation twice a week at a family mediation center, but those visits had revealed more about his character than any investigation could have uncovered. Derek consistently arrived late, often smelling like alcohol, and spent most of his allocated time on his phone rather than engaging with Lily. The court-appointed supervisor, Maria Santos, had documented every incident. Derek attempting to take photos of Lily to send to Amber, Derek becoming frustrated when Lily cried and trying to hand her back to the supervisor, Derek falling asleep during a visit after claiming he'd been working all night. Most damning was the visit where Amber had shown up uninvited, claiming she was Derek's emotional support, and demanding to meet Lily despite explicit court orders prohibiting contact between the affair partner and the child. Real fathers who prioritize their relationships over their children often reveal their true character during supervised visits, where their parenting abilities are observed and documented by professionals trained to assess child welfare and parental fitness. Have you ever watched someone prove exactly who they are when they thought no one important was watching? Did you ever realize that someone's actions during a crisis revealed their true priorities more clearly than their words ever could? The most telling incident had occurred 3 weeks earlier when Derek brought Amber to the family center parking lot, apparently believing that having her wait in the car didn't violate the court order. When Lily had a diaper blowout during the visit, Derek had panicked, claiming he didn't know how to handle that kind of mess, and asking Maria to call Natalie to come handle the situation. Maria's report noted that Derek, despite being Lily's biological father, seemed completely unprepared for basic childcare responsibilities and appeared to view parenting as something that should be done by women. When Natalie arrived to find Amber sitting in Derek's truck taking selfies while her 6-month-old daughter sat in soiled clothes, something inside her shifted from protective concern to fierce determination. This wasn't just about Derek's affair anymore. This was about ensuring that Lily never learned to normalize a father who saw her as an inconvenience to be managed rather than a child to be cherished. Women fighting for their children's custody often discover that supervised visits reveal patterns of neglect or incompetence that their partners successfully hid during the relationship, when the mother was handling most childcare responsibilities. Have you ever realized that someone you thought was a capable parent was actually just letting you do all the real work? Did you ever discover that someone's parenting abilities were actually dependent on your constant management and intervention? Jessica Martinez had prepared Natalie for this final hearing with the thoroughness of a military strategist. They had documentation of every missed visit, every late arrival, every instance where Derek had prioritized his relationship with Amber over his time with Lily. But they also had positive evidence. Lily's medical records showing consistent care under Natalie's sole custody, daycare reports documenting Lily's healthy development and secure attachment to her mother, and testimony from Natalie's professors at the University of Arizona nursing program about her academic success despite the challenges of single motherhood. The court needs to see not just that Derek is unfit, Jessica explained, but that you're providing Lily with stability, consistency, and a secure environment for healthy development. Natalie had spent 4 months proving that she wasn't just running away from Derek's chaos, she was running toward a better life for her daughter. Women succeeding in custody battles often have to demonstrate not only that their ex-partner is harmful, but that they themselves are capable of providing superior care and stability as single mothers. Have you ever had to prove your worth as a parent while simultaneously protecting your child from someone who should have been your partner in that responsibility? Did you ever realize that being a single mother was actually easier than being married to someone who undermined your parenting efforts? The hearing itself was both anticlimactic and vindicating. Derek arrived 20 minutes late with a new attorney, his third since the proceedings began, and immediately began making excuses about traffic and work obligations. Judge Hernandez listened with the patience of someone who'd heard every excuse imaginable, her expression growing more skeptical with each of Derek's explanations. When Derek's attorney tried to argue that his client had learned from his mistakes and deserved a fresh start with his daughter, the judge interrupted to ask about Derek's completion of court-ordered parenting classes and anger management counseling. Derek's admission that he'd attended only 2 of the required 12 sessions effectively ended his attorney's argument before it began. The supervised visit reports painted a picture of a man who viewed fatherhood as a periodic obligation rather than a daily commitment, someone who wanted the emotional satisfaction of being called dad without accepting the practical responsibilities that title required. In family court, judges often encounter parents who want the status and social recognition of parenthood without accepting the sacrifices and daily work that children actually need. Have you ever dealt with someone who wanted the title without doing the work? Did you ever realize that someone was more interested in how they appeared as a parent than in actually meeting their child's needs? When it was Natalie's turn to testify, she spoke with the calm confidence of someone who'd spent 4 months proving her competence every single day. She described Lily's routine: consistent nap times, regular pediatric checkups, age-appropriate developmental activities, and a stable home environment with extended family support from Carmen and Elena. She explained how she'd maintained her nursing program schedule while ensuring Lily never missed a feeding or a bedtime story. She talked about the small apartment they'd found near campus, where Lily had her own nursery painted in soft yellows and greens, where children's books lined the shelves and educational toys covered the living room floor. Most importantly, she described Lily's personality: her favorite songs, her developing laugh, her attachment to a stuffed elephant Carmen had bought her, details that demonstrated the deep, daily knowledge that comes from being present for a child's life rather than visiting it. Women who successfully gain custody often surprise themselves with how much they've learned about their own strength and capabilities during the process of protecting their children. Have you ever realized that you were more capable than you'd imagined when circumstances required you to step up? Did you ever discover that what you thought would overwhelm you actually revealed strengths you didn't know you possessed? Derek's testimony, by contrast, revealed how little he actually knew about his daughter. When Judge Hernandez asked basic questions about Lily's feeding schedule, sleep habits, or developmental milestones, Derek stumbled, giving vague answers about normal baby stuff, and repeatedly stating that babies are pretty much the same at that age. His ignorance about his own daughter's needs and personality was stark evidence that his supervised visits had been performative rather than genuine attempts to build a relationship with Lily. When asked about his future plans for childcare if granted custody, Derek mentioned that Amber was great with kids and could help with babysitting, apparently oblivious to how inappropriate it was to suggest that his affair partner should care for the child whose family he destroyed. Judges often see through parents who view children as accessories to their adult relationships rather than individuals with their own needs for stability and appropriate boundaries. Have you ever watched someone prove their own unfitness through their words and attitudes? Did you ever realize that someone's ignorance about your child revealed how little they'd actually participated in parenting during your relationship? Judge Hernandez's final ruling was delivered with the measured authority of someone who'd seen too many children suffer because courts prioritized parental rights over children's welfare. After reviewing the evidence, supervised visit reports, and testimony from both parties, this court finds that Mr. Rodriguez has demonstrated neither the commitment nor the competence necessary for shared custody of a minor child. His pattern of prioritizing adult relationships over parental responsibilities, his failure to complete court-ordered education and counseling, and his demonstrated ignorance about his child's basic needs indicate that unsupervised custody would not serve Lily's best interests. Natalie felt her knees go weak with relief as the judge continued. Full custody is hereby awarded to Mrs. Rodriguez, with supervised visitation rights for Mr. Rodriguez contingent upon completion of parenting education and demonstrated consistent engagement with his child. Derek's face went through a series of emotions: shock, anger, and finally, something that looked almost like relief, as if he'd been freed from an obligation he'd never really wanted. Toxic Truths helps women succeed in life by teaching you how to fight and survive these situations, and sometimes the greatest victory is watching someone prove exactly who they are when they think charm and excuses will carry them through serious responsibilities. Have you ever felt the validation that comes when an authority figure confirms what you've known all along? Did you ever realize that protecting your child sometimes means accepting that their other parent will choose to remain absent rather than do the work required to be present? As they left the courthouse, Lily babbling happily in her carrier, completely unaware that her future had just been secured, Natalie felt something she hadn't experienced in over a year: peace. Not the temporary relief of avoiding conflict, but the deep peace that comes from knowing you fought for what was right and won. Derek would likely disappear from their lives entirely rather than complete the requirements for continued visitation, His pattern of abandoning responsibilities when they became inconvenient was too well established for him to suddenly develop commitment. Elena had already told Natalie privately that she supported the custody decision completely, saying, "My granddaughter deserves better than a father who sees her as a burden." Carmen was waiting outside the courthouse with a small celebration planned. Dinner at Lily's favorite restaurant where she could practice eating finger foods while Natalie finally relaxed for the first time in months. Have you ever experienced the moment when a long fight finally ended with the outcome you knew was right? Do you believe that children are worth every sacrifice required to protect them from adults who see them as inconveniences rather than gifts? The legal victory was complete, but more importantly, Natalie had learned something profound about herself. She was capable of protecting her daughter from anything, including the man who should have been protecting them both. Lily would grow up knowing that her mother chose truth over comfort, strength over security, and her daughter's welfare over every other consideration. That was a legacy worth fighting for, and Natalie had won that fight decisively. Have you ever realized that the hardest battles sometimes have the most important outcomes? Did you ever understand that standing up for yourself was actually the best gift you could give to someone you love? 18 months later, Natalie stood in the kitchen of their new 2-bedroom apartment near the University of Arizona campus, watching Lily take her first confident steps across the living room toward Carmen, who was visiting for the weekend. The morning sun streamed through windows that Natalie had chosen herself, in a home where every decision, from the cheerful yellow paint in Lily's room to the herb garden on the small balcony, reflected their authentic life together. Lily babbled excitedly as she wobbled toward her aunt, her chubby hands reaching forward for balance, completely secure in the knowledge that loving arms would catch her if she fell. This was what stability looked like. A toddler who laughed instead of crying, who explored instead of clinging, who had never known a home filled with lies or tension. Real children who grow up in honest, peaceful environments develop differently than children raised in chaos. They're more confident, more trusting, more capable of forming healthy relationships because their earliest experiences taught them that love doesn't come with betrayal. Have you ever watched a child thrive when removed from a toxic environment? Did you ever realize that the best gift you could give your child was the security of knowing that their home was built on truth rather than deception? Natalie had graduated from nursing school 3 months earlier, finishing her degree with honors despite the challenges of single motherhood and the emotional upheaval of divorce proceedings. Her professors had marveled at her focus and determination, not knowing that studying medical texts while Lily napped had been her meditation, her way of building something positive while everything else in her life was falling apart. She'd accepted a position at Banner University Medical Center in the Pediatric Intensive Care Unit, work that felt meaningful in a way her previous life never had. Every shift brought her into contact with families facing medical crises, and she found herself uniquely qualified to comfort mothers who felt overwhelmed and frightened, having learned firsthand that women were capable of much more strength than they imagined when their children's welfare was at stake. Women who rebuild their lives after betrayal often discover careers and passions they never would have pursued if they'd remained in comfortable but limiting relationships, finding that necessity became the catalyst for growth they never knew they needed. Have you ever discovered hidden strengths or interests when circumstances forced you to rebuild your life? Did you ever realize that what felt like devastating loss actually opened doors to opportunities you never would have considered before? Derek had disappeared from their lives exactly as Natalie had predicted. After the final custody hearing, he'd made 2 half-hearted attempts at supervised visits before stopping entirely. Elena received occasional text messages from him, usually when he'd been drinking, expressing regret and promising to get his act together, but these promises never translated into action. His relationship with Amber had ended within 6 months of Natalie's departure, apparently dissolving once the excitement of secrecy and forbidden romance gave way to the reality of Derek's consistent irresponsibility and financial instability. Elena had heard through mutual friends that Derek was working construction in Nevada, living in a series of temporary situations, still charming new women with stories about his crazy ex-wife who'd stolen his daughter. The pattern of his life remained unchanged. He sought relationships that required no real commitment, no sacrifice, no growth. Some people, Natalie had learned, preferred the chaos they created to the work required for genuine connection. Have you ever watched someone choose the same destructive patterns repeatedly rather than do the work required for real change? Did you ever realize that someone's promises to transform were just manipulation tactics to avoid consequences for behavior they had no intention of changing? The legal aftermath had been more satisfying than Natalie had expected. Derek's employer had terminated him for misuse of company resources, and the financial investigation had revealed enough fraudulent activity to warrant criminal charges. He'd pleaded guilty to embezzlement and financial fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence and restitution payments that would continue for years. Every month, a portion of Derek's wages was garnished to repay the money he'd stolen from their marriage, money that now funded Lily's college savings account and provided financial security Natalie had never experienced during their relationship. More importantly, the criminal conviction ensured that Derek's pattern of deception was permanently documented in public records, protecting future partners from the same manipulation Natalie had endured. Women who pursue legal consequences for financial abuse often discover that their actions protect not only themselves but also future victims of their ex-partner's patterns, creating accountability that prevents serial abusers from moving seamlessly from one relationship to another. Have you ever realized that holding someone accountable for their actions protected other people from experiencing the same harm? Did you ever understand that your courage in facing difficult legal proceedings could prevent someone else from becoming a victim of the same person's deception? The most profound change in their lives wasn't legal or financial, it was emotional. Lily had never known Derek well enough to miss him, but she thrived in the stable, loving environment Natalie and Carmen had created. She was walking confidently now, saying "Mama" and "Tia" and "Book," developing her personality in an atmosphere of consistent love and attention. Natalie had learned to parent without constantly second-guessing herself, without walking on eggshells around someone else's moods, without apologizing for her child's normal behaviors or needs. She read to Lily every night, sang songs while preparing meals, and celebrated every milestone without having to manage someone else's jealousy or indifference. The silence in their home was peaceful rather than tense, filled with Lily's laughter and babbling rather than the walking on eggshells quiet that had characterized her marriage. Children raised by single mothers who've escaped toxic relationships often develop stronger emotional intelligence and more secure attachments than children raised in households where conflict, deception, and emotional manipulation are normalized. Have you ever experienced the peace that comes from removing chaos from your daily life? Did you ever realize that your child was happier with one present, engaged parent than with two parents when one was emotionally absent or destructive? Natalie's social life had slowly rebuilt itself around authentic relationships rather than the performative friendships she'd maintained during her marriage with Derek. She joined a single mother support group at the university, where she'd met women who understood the unique challenges of rebuilding life while caring for young children. These friendships were deeper and more honest than the surface-level relationships she'd had when she was married, partly because they were built on shared experiences of surviving betrayal and choosing their children's welfare over social expectations. She'd also reconnected with old friends who admitted they'd been concerned about Derek's controlling behavior during her marriage but hadn't known how to express their worries without seeming judgmental. "We could see that you weren't yourself around him," her college roommate Sarah had told her. "But we didn't want to interfere in your marriage." The revelation that people who cared about her had noticed Derek's negative impact before she did was both validating and heartbreaking. Women who leave toxic relationships often discover that their isolation wasn't accidental, that controlling partners systematically undermine their social connections to prevent outside perspectives that might reveal the relationship's dysfunction. Have you ever learned that people who cared about you noticed problems in your relationship before you did? Did you ever realize that someone was systematically isolating you from friends and family who might have helped you see the truth earlier? Financially, Natalie had achieved something she'd never experienced during her marriage: complete transparency and control over her money. Every dollar she earned went toward goals she chose, every expense reflected her priorities rather than funding someone else's deceptions. She'd established an emergency fund, contributed regularly to Lily's college savings, and even saved enough for small luxuries like the organic foods Derek had claimed they couldn't afford while he was spending hundreds on restaurant dinners with Amber. The financial stress she'd felt during their marriage, constantly worried about bills, apologizing for necessary purchases, feeling guilty about spending money on herself or Lily, had been artificial, created by Derek's secret financial mismanagement rather than genuine scarcity. With Derek's garnished wages supplementing her nursing salary, Natalie had more financial security as a divorced single mother than she'd ever had as a married woman. Women who gain control of their finances after leaving deceptive partners often discover that they're more financially capable than they believed, and that much of their previous financial stress was caused by their partner's hidden spending or manipulation. Have you ever discovered that your money problems weren't actually about lack of income but about someone else's irresponsible or secretive spending? Did you ever feel financially secure for the first time after taking complete control of your own resources? Toxic Truths helps women succeed in life by teaching you how to fight and survive these situations, and Natalie had learned the most important lesson of all, that choosing truth over comfort, protection over convenience, and self-respect over false security created a foundation for genuine happiness that no amount of pretending could match. As she watched Lily play with wooden blocks on their living room floor, blocks they'd bought without asking anyone's permission, in a home they'd chosen without compromise, Natalie felt grateful for the betrayal that had forced her to build something real. Derek's affair hadn't destroyed her family. It had revealed that her family had never existed the way she'd imagined it. The real family was sitting in this sunlit apartment, a mother who'd learned to trust her instincts, a daughter who would grow up seeing what authentic love looked like, and a life built on honesty rather than fantasy. Have you ever felt grateful for something terrible because it led you to something better? Did you ever realize that what felt like the end of your world was actually the beginning of your real life? On quiet evenings after Lily went to sleep, Natalie sometimes reflected on the woman she'd been 18 months earlier, exhausted, confused, making excuses for behavior she knew was wrong, sacrificing her intuition for the illusion of family stability. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone Natalie remembered with compassion but could no longer relate to. She'd learned that love didn't require losing yourself, that partnership shouldn't feel like constantly performing for someone else's approval, and that her daughter deserved to see her mother choose dignity over desperation. When Lily became old enough to ask about her father, Natalie would tell her the truth, that sometimes people aren't capable of the love they promise, but that doesn't diminish the love that surrounds her or her own worth. The greatest gift she could give Lily wasn't a perfect family, but the example of a mother who refused to accept lies as love and who built something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. Have you ever realized that the person you became after surviving something difficult was stronger and wiser than the person you were before? Do you believe that children learn more from watching their parents choose courage than from being protected from all difficulties? Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.